In this video, we're going to get some context for what states are and state machines are and write ourselves a little bit of our first state of our story and our first decisions for the player. So let's jump in and have a look at states and state machines. In order for us to create an interesting text adventure game, we're going to need a lot of text and a lot of adventure, to state the obvious. To do that, we are going to need a way to organize our bits of information, our pieces of the story to give to the player. We're going to need a good way to organize our states. What do I mean by states, and what do I mean by state machines? Well, a state is an action or a process or a behavior. It's a thing that we are doing usually. A state machine assumes only one state at a time. I'll show you a state machine in a moment. And conditions, in other words, requirements, transition from one state to the next. So that's state and state machines. What do we mean? You'll see the start symbol here. We lead into our first state. So this is state A, we'll call it. And from state A, we have a decision. This diamond is a symbol in state machines used to symbolize a decision point. From the decision, we might say yes from our decision, and that leads us to state B, which is a different state to state A, state B, or we might say no, that leads to state C. Let's make that real with some examples here. So from our start, we might start with a room with 2 exits. That might be our state, and we would have in our game some text, some flavor to that. It could be, you stroll into a room, there is a smell of burnt toast in the air. Does that mean there's something wrong with your brain? Or does that mean that someone is cooking toast? Whatever it might be. I just made that up on the spot. That's why it wasn't so clever. But so our first state is you're in a room, there are 2 exits. So the player has a choice. Choice is very, very important in games. We have a choice. Which way do you go? That's what we present to the player. To the blue door represents the real world. And then we would go into the next state. And in that next state, we would say, you've entered a world that looks very real and tangible and photorealistic. If you were to choose the red door, for example, maybe that goes to Fantasyland. You walk through the door and you're encountered with a whole bunch of people who are dressed brightly and dancing around and having a wonderful time, whatever our story might be. So this is our state machine, and these are just 3 states and 1 decision point. In our game, it's going to be much, much bigger. We're going to have you go through a door, then you're in another room, maybe you have some conflict. Do you go left? Do you go right? Do you do this? Do you shoot the person? Do you run? Do you climb up the ladder? All these different states, all these different conditions, and all these different transitions. So we may have hundreds of states. Each state may have many lines of story within it. So we might have a lot more text, a lot more of that flavor that I'm talking about in our text adventure, descriptive elements to it. And we need a way to manage all this data, as I was saying before. So this is our problem, or more specifically our requirements, and we need to come up with a solution. If we're doing this all within a single text file that's managing all the states, we would have all of these states, and then for each of these states, we would have the text that's required. We need to do some concatenation here, which is where, because we can't fit our line all the way across here, we won't be able to read it after a while, so we have to break it up. And then we need to, for each of these states, we need to say what the key input is every single time. So there's a lot of repeated code. There's a lot of typing in text into our text file. And there's a lot of, if something goes wrong somewhere in here, then it could break the flow. And there's also a difficulty in keeping track of, okay, this state down here, lock 0. From there, I want to go up to stairs 2, but I also want to transition into corridor 0. So this is a valid way for us to organize our story and our states, but it's a little bit difficult and a little bit clunky to use, and it doesn't scale very well. So our approach will be to use scriptable objects, and that's what we'll talk about in the very next lecture. This lecture, I just wanted to give you the context of our state machine and to give you a quick challenge, which was to come up with your starting state. So what is the first thing that your player is confronted with? What's the first piece of text in your game that you're going to give to the player? Now, later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about game design and game flow to manage your state machine and how you can create that in a nice tool. I'll give you my input on a good tool to use to create that. But for now, we're just doing something pretty quick. We're saying, what's the first state to get the ball rolling? So we've got something to enter in the next video when we're talking about that first state. So come up with 2 or 3 sentences that will start your game. For example, you walk into a room, you smell, what did I say before? Smell burnt toast. It could be that. It could be even cleverer than that, perhaps. And what are the 2 choices your player can make? So this is important at the start. Let's think about what choices are you going to give your player? What format should you write this up in? Let me give you a quick little idea here. If you go into Visual Studio and right up to the top, new file, you can choose a text file. So double click on text file, and here we get a blank text file. It's not going to have any of the autocomplete and any of the errors that we would have if we were in a C# file, a .cs file. We can just type in here. So we can type in the first couple of sentences, and then here are the two choices. So go ahead and create your first couple of sentences for your story and first two choices. And when you've done that, I'll see you back in here in a moment, and I'll give you a quick taste of what I've come up with just very quickly. Welcome back. This is what I've written. A little bit of dialogue up the top here. You can read that if you want, but I'd like you to do something that is your story and not just follow what I've done with mine. I've said there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. I could try doing A or B. What should I do? Take them head on, or to sneak my way to the emergency exit. So this is going to give us some text, a little bit of real context when we're creating our states in the upcoming videos and starting out. Now, if you want to save this, which you probably should so you don't lose it, File, Save as. I'm going to save mine right in my Unity project just so it's in there. This is not typical behavior. Normally we don't use text files to keep notes and save them within Unity, but I wanted to make sure that no matter what platform you're operating on or operating system you have or what you've installed on your computer, that you absolutely would be able to follow along with this lecture and you weren't racing off trying to find a text file editor or some other thing and figuring out what to do. So I'm going to save mine just in the assets folder here and call it I'll call it first state of my game, and then save that. And interestingly, if we jump back over into Unity, you will see, boom, we have this text file, which is the first state of our game, which is pretty handy to have. It's right in the middle of our Unity file, keeping it nice and organized to remind me where it is. We're not going to do that long term. This is just to keep some notes. This is not something we would use in our game. Okay, great work in this lecture. I'll see you in the very next video. We're going to be talking about scriptable objects. See you soon.